Hello guys, Dr. Spooks here. If you enjoy my videos, please click the like button. It's the only way YouTube's algorithm really notices me. I would be very grateful to you. The towering sequoias loomed over the restricted zone like ancient sentinels, their thick branches twisting together to block out the sun. Ranger Eric Tate adjusted the strap of his rifle and surveyed the dense woods ahead. Most people thought of Yosemite National Park as a place of serenity, where natural beauty flourished undisturbed. For Eric, it was something else entirely, a battleground. He had been a ranger for nearly a decade, but it wasn't until 2 years ago that he was offered the job of guarding Area 12. Officially, it didn't exist. The restricted zone wasn't marked on any map, and no tourists ever set foot within its boundaries. The government called it a wildlife conservation area, but Eric knew better. His job wasn't to protect the wildlife, it was to keep it contained. After months of grueling training in tracking, survival, and firearms training and tactics, Eric was sent here with 2 rules. Nothing gets out, and anything suspicious gets reported immediately. Over time, he learned that suspicious covered a wide range of horrors. Area 12 was home to creatures that defied logic. He'd seen things that haunted his dreams, elongated shadows that moved against the wind, eyes that glowed like embers, and shapes that dissolved into mist when pursued. He clicked on his handheld GPS. The boundary was close, marked by a series of buried motion sensors and reinforced fencing camouflaged among the trees. His sidearm, a Glock 19, rested on his hip, but it was his AR-10 rifle he trusted most, a reliable weapon with enough stopping power to handle anything that got too bold. Eric paused as his radio crackled. A familiar, clipped voice came through. "Tate, status check." "Boundary secure," Eric replied. "Nothing to report yet." "Keep it that way," the voice said before cutting out. Eric sighed. The agency wasn't much for small talk. They gave orders and he obeyed. He understood the stakes. If even one of the cryptids escaped, it could spell disaster for the public and for him. Movement caught his eye. He raised the rifle, scanning the underbrush through the scope. A deer burst from the trees, its chest heaving. Eric lowered his weapon, but his relief was short-lived. The deer staggered, its sides streaked with fresh claw marks. It collapsed, legs twitching, and was still. Eric's muscles tensed. Something had spooked it, and it wasn't far. He approached the carcass cautiously, rifle raised. The claw marks were deep, too large for a bear or a mountain lion. The tracks leading away were even stranger, wide, with 3 elongated toes that dug deep into the soil. His earpiece crackled again. "Tate, report." "Possible breach near the northern boundary," Eric said. "Investigating now." "Proceed with caution." Eric nodded to no one in particular and tightened his grip on the rifle. He wasn't just dealing with wildlife here. He was dealing with cryptids, and every instinct told him this was only the beginning. Eric followed the tracks deeper into the restricted zone, his boots crunching against the forest floor. The claw marks gouged into the earth were irregular, as though whatever made them had a loping, uneven gait. He felt the weight of the rifle in his hands, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. Years of experience told him one thing. He was being hunted as much as he was hunting. The forest thickened, the sequoias growing denser, their roots rising like skeletal fingers from the earth. The air seemed heavier here, charged with an unnatural stillness. No birds chirped, no insects buzzed. Even the wind held its breath. Eric stopped abruptly. A faint noise reached his ears, a low, guttural growl that sent a chill down his spine. He dropped to one knee, scanning the area through his rifle scope. Between the trees, a shadow moved, too large to be a deer and too silent to be a bear. It stopped just out of clear view, the shape obscured by the underbrush. "Come on," Eric muttered under his breath, keeping his aim steady. The shadow shifted, and for a moment he caught a glimpse of it. A creature with mottled, grayish skin stretched tight over its angular frame. Its arms were unnaturally long, almost dragging on the ground, and its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting a dull orange light. Eric's heart thudded in his chest as he recognized it from the briefing files. A skewer, one of the cryptids known for its speed and predatory instincts. It lunged. Eric fired without hesitation. The crack of the rifle echoed through the forest, and the creature snarled as the bullet hit its shoulder, staggering it. It scrambled back into the shadows, its movements jerky and uncoordinated, like a marionette with tangled strings. Eric fired again, the second shot ripping into a tree as the creature disappeared. He stood, his breathing heavy, scanning the forest. He didn't dare follow it deeper into the restricted zone. Not yet. Instead, he checked the tracks. Blood spattered the ground, thick and black with a pungent metallic odor. It was wounded, but not enough to stop it. Skewers were known for their resilience. He'd read reports of bullets failing to kill them outright unless they hit vital points. Eric keyed his radio. Tate reporting, skewer sighting confirmed. Wounded but not neutralized. Boundary still secure. The reply came swiftly. Understood. Reinforce your position. Priority is containment. Containment. Always containment. Eric knew what that meant. He was on his own. Reinforcements never came unless the situation was catastrophic. The growling started again, louder this time, coming from his left. He swung the rifle around, scanning the dense underbrush, but the sound stopped abruptly. The skewer wasn't alone. Eric tightened his grip, his mind racing through his options. If they were coordinating, they'd try to flank him. He shifted his position, keeping his back to a large tree trunk, and switched to his Glock for closer quarters. His training kicked in, instincts honed by years of dealing with dangerous predators. The forest remained silent, but Eric knew the calm wouldn't last. The hunt was far from over. Eric steadied his breathing, his Glock held at the ready. The forest remained still, but he knew better than to trust the silence. Skewers were clever. They didn't attack outright. They tested, prodded, and waited for the perfect moment to strike. The sensation of being watched prickled the back of his neck. He scanned the shadows, searching for movement, but nothing stirred. Then, in the distance, he heard it. The faint, rhythmic beeping of a motion sensor tripped near the northern boundary. His stomach dropped. A breach. He moved quickly, holstering the Glock and raising his rifle again. Navigating the forest was second nature, his footsteps silent against the moss-covered ground. As he approached the perimeter, the faint hum of the buried sensors grew louder in his earpiece, signaling where the breach had occurred. A section of the reinforced fencing lay in disarray, its metal strands torn apart as if by immense force. The claw marks etched into the posts confirmed his worst fear. More than one cryptid had been here. "Damn it," Eric muttered, crouching to examine the ground. Tracks crisscrossed the area, some leading deeper into the restricted zone, but others heading toward the open forest beyond the boundary. He placed a hand on the earth, feeling the residual warmth of something that had passed through not long ago. He keyed his radio. Tate reporting, northern boundary compromised, multiple tracks leading out. "Estimate the number," his handler replied, the usual calm, clinical tone masking any hint of concern. "At least 3, 2 heading deeper into the zone, 1, Eric hesitated, tracing a set of prints that veered sharply westward. "1 is outside the boundary." The response was immediate. "Neutralize it before it breaches containment further. Priority 1. Eric didn't need to be told twice. He was already moving, following the tracks westward. The path was erratic, the prints doubling back and circling, as though the creature were testing him. He kept his rifle raised, his finger hovering over the trigger. Whatever had escaped was dangerous, and if it reached populated areas, the consequences would be catastrophic. The tracks led him to a narrow ravine bordered by jagged rocks and thick underbrush. The dense vegetation made it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Eric's pulse quickened. This was a perfect ambush site, and the skewers were known for their cunning. A low, guttural growl echoed through the ravine, the sound bouncing off the rocks and making it impossible to pinpoint its source. Eric froze, scanning the area through his rifle scope. Movement flickered at the edge of his vision, a blur of grayish skin darting between the rocks. He aimed and fired. The bullet struck stone, sparking off the rock face. The creature let out an enraged screech and launched itself from the shadows, its grotesque form fully visible now. It was taller than Eric had anticipated, its limbs grotesquely elongated and tipped with claws that glinted in the dim light. Its mouth opened in a snarl, revealing rows of jagged teeth. Eric fired again, this time hitting its chest. The impact sent the creature stumbling backward, but it didn't fall. It lunged at him with terrifying speed, its claws slashing through the air. Eric barely managed to sidestep, swinging his rifle like a club to knock it off balance. The creature hissed, retreating a few steps, its glowing eyes fixed on him. Blood oozed from the wound in its chest, but it didn't slow down. Eric steadied his aim, his sights locked on its head. He squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, and the creature crumpled to the ground. Eric exhaled sharply, his heart pounding. He approached cautiously, keeping his rifle trained on its unmoving form. The creature's chest no longer rose or fell, and its eyes had dimmed to black. It was dead. He keyed his radio again. One skewer neutralized, boundary compromised but contained for now. "Good work," his handler said. "Reinforce the area and continue patrol. Containment is critical." Eric looked at the torn fencing in the distance. This was only the beginning. Something was stirring within Area 12, and he wasn't sure he was prepared for what came next. Eric worked quickly to patch the torn fencing. It wasn't a permanent solution, but the temporary repair would slow down anything else trying to escape. The reinforced steel cables were designed to withstand the force of the creatures, but something had managed to tear through them as if they were little more than thread. That realization gnawed at him as he fastened the final cable and surveyed the boundary. The forest was still unnervingly quiet. He glanced at his watch. The sun would set soon, and night patrols in Area 12 were exponentially more dangerous. Most cryptids became bolder in the dark, their movements faster, their hunting more calculated. As he finished his repairs, his radio crackled with static, followed by an unfamiliar voice. "Anyone on this frequency? Hello, we're lost." Eric froze. Civilians. His blood ran cold at the implications. He pressed the button to reply, his voice firm. "This is Ranger Eric Tate. Identify yourselves." A man responded, his voice strained with panic. "We're hikers. We got off the trail hours ago. My wife's hurt, twisted her ankle. We saw some fencing and thought we could cut through to find help." Eric's jaw tightened. "That's a restricted area. Stay where you are. I'll find you." "No, you don't understand. Something's out here with us," the man said, his voice dropping to a frightened whisper. "We saw... I don't know what it was, but it's stalking us." Eric felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The breach earlier hadn't just been dangerous for the public. It had already drawn victims into the zone. He grabbed his gear, slinging his rifle over his shoulder and switching on his GPS. "I'm on my way. Do not move. Stay together and stay quiet." The radio went silent, and Eric set off toward their coordinates, his boots crunching softly on the forest floor. Every step brought a growing sense of unease. It wasn't just the hikers that worried him. It was whatever had lured them into Area 12. The hikers' signal was weak, distorted by the dense canopy above. As he drew closer, he noticed signs of their presence: a discarded water bottle, a torn piece of fabric caught on a branch. But there were other signs too, subtle impressions in the dirt, the faint stink of decay hanging in the air. Whatever had breached the boundary was tracking them. Eric quickened his pace, his eyes darting between the trees. The light was fading fast, the shadows lengthening. He activated the flashlight mounted on his rifle, its beam cutting through the gloom. "Hello?" a voice called out faintly from ahead. Eric recognized the man from the radio. "I'm coming to you. Stay calm," Eric called back. As he crested a small ridge, he saw them. A man and a woman huddled together against the base of a massive tree, their faces pale and drawn. The woman clutched her ankle, a makeshift bandage wrapped around it. Relief flickered in the man's eyes when he saw Eric, but it was short-lived. From the shadows behind them, something moved. Eric raised his rifle instinctively. "Get down," he barked. The man froze, his mouth opening to protest. But Eric didn't have time to explain. He fired a warning shot into the darkness, the crack of the rifle echoing through the trees. A guttural snarl answered, deep and resonant. The hikers scrambled to the ground as Eric stepped between them and the advancing shadow. The creature emerged, its grotesque form illuminated by the flashlight. It was similar to the skewer he'd killed earlier, but larger, its muscles rippling under its mottled skin. It moved on all fours, its claws digging into the earth with each step. Eric fired, the bullet slamming into its shoulder. It let out a roar of pain but didn't stop. He fired again, aiming for the head, but the creature was already charging. "Run!" Eric shouted, pulling his sidearm as the beast closed the distance. The hikers hesitated for a moment before scrambling to their feet and fleeing into the forest. Eric stood his ground, unloading the Glock into the creature as it lunged for him. It staggered, its momentum carrying it past him and into a tree. He turned, firing the last round into the base of its skull. The creature collapsed with a heavy thud, its body twitching once before going still. He reloaded quickly, his breaths coming fast. In the distance, he heard the hikers yelling, their voices receding into the trees. He keyed his radio, his voice sharp. Hikers found, target neutralized. But deep down, Eric knew this was far from over. Eric trudged through the forest, his steps deliberate and silent despite the urgency thrumming in his veins. He needed to find the hikers before another cryptid did. The forest was fully cloaked in darkness now, the faint glow of his rifle-mounted flashlight, his only guide. Every creak of a branch or rustle of leaves set his nerves on edge. He knew he couldn't stay here for long. The cryptids would be regrouping. The hiker's trail was easy to follow. They left a clear path of broken branches, disturbed foliage, and smeared blood from the woman's injured ankle. Eric muttered a curse under his breath. They were practically a beacon for anything hunting in these woods. His earpiece crackled and he immediately halted, pressing himself against a tree. A deep, guttural growl reached him, not from his radio, but from somewhere ahead. He crouched, slowly advancing, his rifle raised. The flashlight beam swept across the forest floor, landing on a strange formation of rocks and dense underbrush. Something about the area felt wrong. As he approached, Eric saw the signs, twisted branches arranged in unnatural patterns, charred patches of earth, and bones, animal and human alike, scattered like grim confetti. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and his stomach turned. He had found their lair. At the center of the clearing was an entrance to a cave, its mouth jagged and black, as if the earth itself had split open. The hiker's trail led directly to it. Eric's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a cryptid lair, it was the center of their activity, a place they clearly defended fiercely. He clicked his radio. Tate reporting found a probable cryptid nesting site, evidence of multiple casualties, including human remains, proceeding with caution. "Do not engage unless necessary," his handler replied, the static-laden voice devoid of emotion. "Reinforce the boundary and retreat if needed." Eric grimaced. Reinforce and retreat? That wasn't an option if the hikers were inside. He couldn't live with leaving them to their fate. Tightening his grip on his rifle, he pressed forward, his flashlight slicing into the cavern's shadowy depths. The interior was worse than he had imagined. The walls were slick with some kind of viscous substance that glistened in the light, and the ground squelched under his boots. Piles of bones were stacked haphazardly, and the air was filled with a low, resonant hum that set his teeth on edge. A faint, pitiful sound reached him, whimpering. Eric moved quickly, following the sound deeper into the cave. His flashlight revealed the hikers huddled together near a far wall, their faces pale and streaked with tears. The man spotted Eric first, his eyes widening in desperate relief. "Please," he whispered, barely audible. "It's still here." Eric raised a hand to silence him and scanned the chamber. The hum grew louder, and a shape emerged from the shadows. It was enormous, crouched low to the ground with a sleek, sinewy frame. Its eyes glowed with the same dull orange light as the others, but this one was different, more intelligent, more calculating. It let out a growl that seemed to reverberate through the cavern, its claws scraping against the stone as it advanced. Eric aimed at its head and fired. The bullet struck true, but the creature barely flinched, its gaze fixed on him. "Move," Eric barked at the hikers, motioning for them to run. They hesitated for only a moment before scrambling past him toward the cave entrance. Eric kept his rifle trained on the creature, firing shot after shot as he backed toward the exit. Each bullet tore into its flesh, but it showed no sign of slowing. He was almost out of the cave when the creature lunged. Eric dropped to one knee and fired a final round directly into its gaping mouth. The creature reeled, its body convulsing as it collapsed. Black ichor spilled across the cavern floor, pooling at Eric's feet. He didn't wait to confirm the kill. He turned and sprinted after the hikers. Emerging into the open air, Eric found the hikers trembling just beyond the clearing. "Keep moving," he ordered, his voice firm. "Follow my lead." They obeyed, and together they made their way back toward the boundary. Eric's mind raced. If this was just one lair, how many more were hidden in Area 12? And what would it take to truly contain them? Eric guided the hikers through the forest with quick, purposeful steps. His senses were on high alert, every sound amplified in the oppressive darkness. The skewer lair wasn't far behind them, and there was no telling how many more creatures were lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. The injured woman stumbled, letting out a sharp cry of pain as her twisted ankle gave out. Her husband caught her, his face pale and streaked with dirt. "We can't go any faster," he said, his voice trembling. "She's hurt." Eric glanced at the treetops, his flashlight flickering over the dense canopy. He could feel the creatures watching them, their predatory gazes pressing against his back like a physical weight. Time was running out. "We stop, we die," Eric said, his voice cold but not unkind. "Put her on your back if you have to. We need to move." The man nodded shakily and hoisted his wife onto his back, grunting under her weight. They resumed their pace, slower than Eric would have liked, but better than staying still. His mind raced as he mentally mapped the path back to the boundary. If they could reach the fencing, the sensors might buy them enough time to radio for an extraction. A guttural snarl pierced the night, low and rumbling, coming from somewhere to their right. Eric spun, raising his rifle and scanning the darkness. His flashlight caught a flash of movement, a pale, elongated limb disappearing behind a tree. "They're flanking us," he muttered. "Keep moving, don't stop." The hikers obeyed, but their pace faltered as the snarls grew louder and more numerous. The creatures weren't just hunting, they were herding. Eric realized too late that they were being funneled into a trap. The forest opened up into a clearing, the ground littered with jagged rocks and twisted roots. The hikers hesitated, but Eric pushed them forward. "Go, the other side of the clearing, now!" As they ran, the skewers emerged from the tree line, their grotesque forms illuminated by the moonlight. There were at least 4 of them, their glowing eyes fixed on Eric and the hikers. They moved with unnerving speed, their limbs contorting as they bounded over the uneven terrain. Eric dropped to one knee, aiming his rifle at the nearest creature. He fired, the bullet striking its chest and sending it sprawling to the ground. Another charged from the left, and he swung his rifle around, firing again. The creature staggered but didn't fall, its claws slashing at the air as it closed the distance. The hikers reached the edge of the clearing, but the woman's screams cut through the chaos. One of the creatures had darted ahead, blocking their path. The husband tried to shield her, but the skewer knocked him aside with a swipe of its massive claw. Eric didn't hesitate. He drew his sidearm and fired 3 quick shots, each one hitting its mark. The skewer let out a piercing shriek before collapsing. Eric rushed forward, pulling the hikers to their feet. "Run!" he shouted, his voice cutting through their panic. "I'll cover you." The remaining skewers circled the clearing, their movements deliberate. Eric backed toward the hikers, firing controlled shots to keep the creatures at bay. His ammo was running low, and the creatures seemed to sense it. They grew bolder, darting closer with each pass. One lunged, its claws slicing through the air. Eric ducked, slamming the butt of his rifle into its head and firing point blank into its chest. The creature fell, writhing, but another was already behind it. Eric fired again, the recoil jarring his shoulder as the shot tore through its shoulder. "Keep going," he yelled over his shoulder. "Don't stop." The hikers disappeared into the tree line, their ragged breaths fading into the distance. Eric stood his ground, his rifle trained on the remaining skewers. They hesitated, snarling, their glowing eyes reflecting their frustration. Eric knew they were testing him, waiting for him to falter. His radio crackled. "Tate, report. Boundary breached, engaged multiple hostiles," he said, his voice strained. "Hikers extracted, returning to boundary." "Understood. Maintain containment." Eric gritted his teeth, his frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Easy for them to say, sitting in some distant control room while he faced death head-on. He fired one last shot into the air, a warning to the skewers, before retreating into the forest. The boundary was still a mile away, and the hunt wasn't over yet. The sound of his boots pounding against the forest floor mingled with the distant growls of the skewers trailing him. Eric kept his pace steady but purposeful, scanning the shadows as he moved. The hikers were ahead of him, their frantic breathing and occasional stumbling the only signs of their progress. The fence boundary wasn't far, but Eric knew they weren't safe. Not yet. "Keep moving," he barked, glancing back to ensure the creatures hadn't closed the gap. The skewers were relentless hunters, but they also calculated their attacks. They weren't rushing, they were waiting for an opening. As the hikers crested a small hill, the faint metallic gleam of the boundary fence came into view. Relief flickered across their faces, but Eric didn't let his guard down. He motioned for them to stay put while he approached the fence, his rifle at the ready. The motion sensors were intact, their subtle hum reassuring, but the tension in the air told him the cryptids weren't finished. "Climb over," he said, motioning toward the hikers. "Now." The man helped his injured wife up first, her hands fumbling for purchase on the metal as she dragged herself over. Eric kept his rifle trained on the tree line, watching for any sign of movement. The man followed quickly, his landing on the other side clumsy but effective. Eric gave a sharp nod. "Stay low and keep moving along the perimeter. Follow the markers back to the ranger station." "What about you?" the man asked, his voice trembling. "I'll catch up," Eric replied curtly, his attention already shifting back to the forest. The skewers appeared as if conjured by the growing darkness. 3 of them slipped from the shadows, their glowing eyes locking onto Eric. He adjusted his stance, taking a deep breath as he aimed his rifle. He fired once, the shot hitting the lead creature squarely in the chest. It staggered but didn't fall, letting out a guttural snarl that sent the others surging forward. Eric dropped to one knee, firing in quick succession. The second skewer fell, its grotesque limbs twitching as it crumpled to the ground. The third lunged, its claws slicing through the air inches from Eric's head. He rolled to the side, firing his sidearm into its exposed flank. The creature howled, collapsing in a heap, but Eric knew there were more. His radio crackled again, the familiar detached voice of his handler cutting through the static. "Tate, status." "Boundary reinforced," Eric said, reloading his rifle with practiced efficiency. 3 hostiles down, but the activity's escalating. Something stirring them up. There was a brief pause before the voice replied. "Return to base. Debrief immediately." Eric hesitated. The agency rarely called him back unless something significant had shifted. He glanced at the boundary, ensuring the hikers were well on their way, then turned and began retracing his steps toward the base camp. The ranger station was a small fortified outpost hidden deep within the restricted zone. Eric entered through the reinforced door, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. The familiar hum of fluorescent lights greeted him, along with the low, steady beeping of monitoring equipment. A man in a dark suit was waiting for him, his expression unreadable. Eric had seen him before, a handler from the agency, always brief and vague. He was the kind of man who never gave more information than was absolutely necessary. "You found their lair," the man said, his tone devoid of surprise. "Yeah, and a lot more than that," Eric replied, setting his rifle on the table. The hikers stumbled into the zone, and something's pushing the cryptids closer to the boundary. The handler nodded, as if this were expected. Activity has been increasing for months. We've theorized the skewers are adapting, possibly communicating. Eric frowned. You're telling me they're getting smarter? Not just smarter, the handler said. More organized. They've been testing the boundaries. This breach wasn't random. It was a coordinated effort. Eric felt a chill run down his spine. And you waited until now to tell me? The handler shrugged. Your job is containment. Knowing their tactics doesn't change that. Eric stared at the man, his frustration boiling beneath the surface. If they're evolving, how long before containment isn't enough? The handler's expression darkened. That's why you're here, Ranger Tate. To ensure that doesn't happen. The conversation ended as abruptly as it had started. The handler handed Eric a new set of coordinates, another section of the zone requiring reinforcement. The message was clear: no rest, no reprieve. Eric returned to the forest, his mind racing. The agency knew more than they let on, and the cryptids weren't the only thing he was beginning to distrust. Eric moved through the forest with a renewed sense of purpose and unease. The coordinates given by the handler led to a remote section of the boundary he hadn't patrolled in months. This area, deeper within the restricted zone, was rumored to be home to the largest concentrations of cryptids. If the skewers were testing boundaries here, it meant one thing: they were preparing for a mass breakout. The wind picked up as he approached the designated area, carrying with it the sharp metallic scent of blood. His boots crunched against the ground littered with broken branches and tufts of fur, evidence of a recent struggle. Eric activated the motion sensors near the boundary, their faint beeps confirming activity nearby. The forest was alive with movement. Shadows darted between trees, the sound of claws scratching bark echoing in the stillness. He felt their presence before he saw them. The skewers were gathering, their guttural growls and snorts blending into a chorus of predatory hunger. Eric stopped at the base of a ridge overlooking a narrow valley. The boundary fence stretched across the terrain, its reinforced steel cables glowing faintly in the moonlight. Beyond it, dozens of cryptids were emerging from the trees. The skewers moved like a pack of wolves, their elongated limbs twisting as they stalked the perimeter. Behind them, hulking shapes lingered in the shadows. Larger, more grotesque creatures Eric had only seen in agency briefings. These were no ordinary cryptids. They were something far worse. He keyed his radio. Tate reporting, we've got a serious situation. Multiple hostiles at the southern boundary. They're testing the fence, preparing to breach. The response was immediate. Do not let them breach, Tate. Reinforcements are unavailable. You're on your own. Eric swallowed hard, suppressing the anger boiling beneath his calm exterior. Typical. He was always alone when it mattered most. Adjusting the scope on his rifle, he zeroed in on the lead skewer, a particularly large one pacing near the boundary. His first shot rang out, the crack of the rifle breaking the stillness. The bullet struck the creature's chest, sending it sprawling. The others reacted instantly, their glowing eyes snapping toward him. They let out unearthly shrieks and charged toward the fence, claws tearing at the ground. Eric fired again and again, each shot finding its mark. The boundary sensors flared as the creatures slammed into the fencing, their claws raking against the reinforced steel. Sparks flew as they tested its strength, their collective weight pressing against it like a tidal wave. The ground shook as one of the larger cryptids emerged from the shadows. A massive, lumbering beast with thick, mottled skin and jagged protrusions along its spine. It roared, its deep, resonant bellow vibrating in Eric's chest. This was no skewer. It was something far worse, and it wasn't stopping at the fence. Eric reached into his pack, pulling out the emergency explosives he'd been issued for last-ditch containment. He set the charges along the ridge, positioning them to collapse the valley entrance if the creatures breached the boundary. The skewers were relentless, their claws tearing into the fencing with unnatural strength. The larger cryptid barreled forward, its immense bulk bending the steel cables. "Come on, you bastard," Eric muttered, firing at the massive creature's head. The bullets barely slowed it, glancing off its thick hide like pebbles. It reached the fence, its claws wrapping around the cables and ripping them apart with a deafening screech. Eric triggered the explosives. The valley erupted in a fiery explosion, the shockwave knocking him off his feet. Dirt and debris rained down as the ridge collapsed, sending massive boulders crashing into the valley below. The fence crumpled under the weight, and the cryptids disappeared beneath a cloud of dust and rubble. Eric scrambled to his feet, coughing as he surveyed the destruction. The valley was sealed, the boundary reinforced by the natural barrier of fallen rocks. The motion sensors beeped faintly, signaling the absence of movement. For now, the cryptids were contained. He keyed his radio, his voice steady despite the chaos. Tate reporting. Breach contained. Valley sealed with explosives. Situation under control. The handler's voice came through, as emotionless as ever. Good work, Ranger Tate. Return to base for debriefing. Eric stared into the valley, his grip tightening on his rifle. The creatures would regroup, adapt, and try again. Eric trudged back toward the ranger station, his body aching from the explosive shockwave. His uniform was torn, streaked with dirt and sweat, and the adrenaline that had kept him sharp through the encounter was fading fast, leaving exhaustion in its wake. The forest around him felt eerily calm now, the aftermath of his desperate stand leaving an unnatural stillness in the air. The hike back to base was grueling, every step a reminder of the narrow escape he and the hikers had just endured. He thought of them, terrified but alive. He had done his part, even if the agency's priorities weren't always clear about saving civilians. Containment was their mission, but Eric couldn't ignore the people caught in the crossfire. When he reached the station, its reinforced steel door glinting under the dim light of the moon, he punched in his access code and entered. The stark interior, all metal and concrete, felt suffocating after the open forest. The hum of the monitoring equipment filled the space, accompanied by the faint crackle of static from the station's communications console. He sank into the chair at the desk, his rifle resting across his knees. The radio crackled, and his handler's voice came through. "Tate, we need your report." Eric sighed, running a hand through his dirt-streaked hair. Breach was significant, at least 20 skewers and something else, bigger, stronger. It tore through the fencing like it was paper. There was a pause on the other end before the handler replied. Describe the larger entity. "Built like a tank," Eric said, his tone grim. "Thick, spined hide, claws like goddamn steel hooks. My rounds barely slowed it. Took explosives to bring it down, and even then I'm not sure it's dead." Another pause, then, noted. "Reinforcement of that boundary section will be prioritized." Eric let out a bitter laugh. "Reinforcement? It's rubble now. The only reason it's holding is because the ridge has collapsed." "Containment achieved," the handler said flatly, as if that solved everything. Eric leaned back, his exhaustion giving way to frustration. "You knew this would happen, didn't you? You've been tracking the increase in activity, the coordination. Why wasn't I told?" "Our job is to ensure containment, not to share unverified data," the handler replied. "You performed as expected." "As expected?" Eric snapped, his voice rising. "I'm out here alone fighting things you won't even name, and you can't give me a straight answer about what the hell is going on." The handler's voice remained calm, almost unnervingly so. "Your position is critical, Ranger Tate. You understand the importance of the work. If you'd like to terminate your contract, we can arrange for a replacement." Eric stared at the radio, the weight of those words settling on him. Terminate his contract. Leave Area 12 in someone else's hands. He thought of the hikers, the breach, the growing intelligence of the cryptids. He couldn't walk away, not when he was the only one standing between those creatures and the outside world. "Keep your replacement," Eric said, his voice low but firm. "I'm not going anywhere." "Understood," the handler replied. "Your next assignment will arrive shortly. Rest while you can." The radio went silent, leaving Eric alone with his thoughts. He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, and stared at the map of Area 12 pinned to the wall. Red markers indicated previous breaches, their frequency increasing in recent months. He traced his finger along the southern boundary, now sealed by his explosives, and then to the deeper sections of the restricted zone marked only with vague warnings. What was in those uncharted areas? The agency knew, but they weren't telling. And yet they relied on him to keep the cryptids contained, armed with only what little information they deemed necessary. He shook his head, feeling the weight of the impossible task settling on his shoulders once again. After a long moment, Eric stood, grabbed a rag, and began cleaning his rifle. The familiar ritual calmed his mind, grounding him in the simple, practical actions of maintenance. He wasn't here to understand the cryptids or the agency's secrets. He was here to do a job. And as long as the creature stayed in Area 12, he'd keep doing it. The sun rose slowly over the treetops, its warm light filtering through the thick canopy and casting long shadows across the forest floor. Eric stood at the boundary, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The reinforced steel cables and buried sensors were intact for now, but he knew it wouldn't last. The cryptids never stopped testing, never stopped searching for a weakness. They were relentless. He shifted his stance, wincing as a sharp pain lanced through his ribs. The injuries from the previous night were minor compared to what they could have been, but they served as a stark reminder of how close he had come to failure. Failure, in his line of work, didn't just mean death, it meant catastrophe. Eric's radio crackled. "Tate, status check. Boundary secure," he replied. His voice was steady, betraying none of the exhaustion he felt. "No movement." "Understood. Continue patrol." The line went silent again, leaving him alone with the sounds of the forest. Birds chirped hesitantly, their calls gradually returning as the chaos of the night faded. Eric found himself envying their ignorance. They didn't know what lurked just beyond the trees, what monstrous shapes prowled the shadows. But he did. He walked along the boundary, his steps methodical, his eyes sharp. Every so often he stopped to check the motion sensors, ensuring the system was functioning properly. The explosive collapse of the valley had bought them time, but the cryptids would adapt. They always did. As he moved, his mind wandered to the hikers. He had no doubt the agency would ensure their silence, either through intimidation or something more final. That was the cost of containment, secrets kept at any cost. He'd done his best to save them, but he wouldn't see them again. That was just as well. The less they knew about him, the safer they'd be. Reaching a small clearing, Eric paused, his gaze drifting to the dense forest beyond the boundary. The shadows there seemed deeper, darker, as if the trees themselves were conspiring to hide what lay within. He thought of the skewers, of the larger creature that had nearly torn through the fence, and of the unexplored regions of Area 12. What else was out there, waiting to test the limits of his endurance? He didn't want to know, but he would find out. That was the job. Eric adjusted the strap of his rifle and turned back toward the ranger station. The agency would keep sending him to reinforce the boundaries, to patrol the woods, to face down the horrors that humanity wasn't ready to know existed. And he would keep answering the call. Not because he trusted the agency, but because he understood the stakes. If he didn't do this job, who would? Back at the station, he cleaned his weapons, patched his gear, and prepared for the next call. He knew it would come soon. The cryptids weren't finished, and neither was he. As the shadows deepened once more over Area 12, Eric stood ready, a silent protector armed with a rifle, a sidearm, and the resolve to hold the line. Whatever came next, he would face it, because that was what the job demanded. I never thought my life would get so messed up. I used to be just an ordinary person, living a pretty normal life. I had a decent job, a small group of close friends, and a loving family. But I was always bored, feeling like I needed something more exciting. I never imagined that my curiosity would lead me down such a dark and disturbing path. It all started one quiet evening in late autumn. The air was crisp, and the leaves were changing colors. I was sitting alone in my dimly lit apartment, mindlessly scrolling through the internet. The only light in the room was from my laptop screen, casting weird shadows on the walls. I was just browsing through forums and websites when I stumbled upon a discussion about the dark web. I was curious, reading through the comments and getting fascinated by all the stories of illegal activities and hidden services. One comment really stood out. Looking for a thrill? Hire a hacker to mess with your life. It's the ultimate adrenaline rush. At first, I thought it was a joke, but the idea got stuck in my head. What if I could shake things up a bit? What if I could make my life more exciting, even if it was through something as crazy as this? The thought stayed with me, growing stronger every day. Eventually, curiosity got the best of me. I went deeper into the dark web, exploring its confusing paths with a mix of fear and excitement. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for, a forum where you could hire hackers for different things. The usernames were anonymous, and the services ranged from harmless pranks to serious crimes. I hesitated, my heart racing, but the thrill of the unknown was too tempting. I posted a request, keeping it vague but interesting. Looking for a hacker to disrupt my social life. Make it chaotic but no physical harm. Let's see how far we can go. I hit send, my hand shaking. I didn't expect a response, but within minutes I got a private message from someone calling themselves Dark SL. Dark SL's message was short but scary. I can make your life a living hell. Are you sure you want this? My heart was pounding as I typed my reply. Yes, let's do it. For the next few days, everything was quiet. I went on with my usual routine, checking my messages all the time, half expecting to hear back from Dark SL. Just when I was starting to think it was all a joke, I got another message. Your life will change starting tomorrow. Be prepared. The next morning, I woke up to find my phone flooded with messages and missed calls. Confused, I scrolled through the notifications. My social media accounts were a mess. Posts and comments I had never written were all over my profiles, filled with disturbing and offensive content. Friends and family were messaging me, asking what was going on. My inbox was full of hate mail and threats from people I didn't even know. I panicked as I tried to regain control of my accounts. Passwords had been changed, security questions altered. It was like someone had taken over my online identity. I contacted customer support for each platform, desperately trying to explain the situation, but the process was slow and frustrating. Meanwhile, the damage kept spreading. It wasn't just online. My personal life started falling apart too. My phone rang non-stop with calls from unknown numbers, each more disturbing than the last. Some were prank calls, others were chilling threats. I couldn't block them fast enough. My friends and colleagues got messages from my hacked accounts, spreading lies and rumors that ruined my reputation. I found myself isolated, shunned by the very people I once trusted. Then came the emails. Dark SL wasn't happy with just ruining my social life. They wanted to break me completely. They sent me detailed reports of my private life, things only I knew, secrets I had never shared with anyone. It was like they had a window into my soul, and they were using it to torment me. Each email felt like a stab in the heart. One night I got an email with an attachment. The subject line read, "Watch this." My hand shook as I opened the file. It was a video, grainy and dark, showing the inside of my apartment. The camera panned around, lingering on my personal belongings, before focusing on my bedroom door. The realization hit me hard. Someone had been inside my home, filming while I was away. The sheer violation of my privacy left me paralyzed with fear. The final straw came when I received a message from Dark SL. "Enjoying the chaos? This is just the beginning." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I had unleashed a nightmare, and there was no turning back. In my desperation, I tried to trace Dark SL to find some way to stop the madness. but they were always one step ahead, covering their tracks with meticulous precision. I felt like a puppet, with Dark SL pulling the strings, enjoying my misery. I had asked for this. I had sought out the thrill, the excitement. But now, as I sat in the darkness of my apartment, my life in ruins, I realized the true horror of my decision. I had invited a monster into my life, and it was tearing me apart from the inside out. This was only the beginning. The descent into darkness had just begun, and there was no escape. Things just got worse and worse after I hired Dark SL. Every day brought more problems, and I was falling apart. I could hardly sleep, always worried about what would happen next. My friends tried to help, but they were also confused and scared. Sarah, one of my closest friends, said I should go to the police. I didn't want to at first. How do you explain that you hired a hacker to mess up your own life? But I had no choice. So I went to the police. I sat in a small room and tried to tell my story to an officer. He looked at me like I was crazy. So you hired a hacker from the dark web, and now you want us to stop them? He asked. Yes, I said, feeling stupid. We'll file a report, but finding someone on the dark web is almost impossible, he said. Change your passwords, contact your service providers, and maybe get some cybersecurity help. I left the station feeling hopeless. The police couldn't help me. I changed my passwords, but Dark SL always got back in. It was like they were always watching. Then it got worse. I found a note under my door one night. We're watching you. Someone had been in my building, maybe even inside my apartment. I felt sick. I installed security cameras and changed my locks, but it didn't help my anxiety. I hardly left my place. My safe home felt like a trap. Work was my last bit of normal life. But then my boss called me into his office. He had been patient, but now he said, I'm sorry, but we can't have this kind of distraction at work. I have to let you go. Losing my job was the last straw. My life was in ruins. I had to do something. I went back to the dark web, desperate to find someone to help me fight Dark SL. I posted a new request. Need a hacker to help me take down Dark SL. Urgent. After waiting for what felt like forever, I got a message from someone named Phoenix. Their message was short but gave me hope. I can help you, but it won't be easy. Dark SL is dangerous. Phoenix and I started working together. It was tough. Dark SL had covered their tracks well. Every time we made progress, they hit back harder. But at least I wasn't alone anymore. Phoenix knew what they were doing. One night, Phoenix sent me a message. I found a lead. Dark SL is part of a network of hackers. They're not alone. We might have a chance. This was our first real break. Phoenix worked non-stop. I could see a bit of hope, but I knew it would come at a cost. Dark SL wouldn't go down without a fight. The next few days were a mix of fear and adrenaline. We got closer to finding Dark SL's real identity. The attacks on me got worse. Dark SL was trying everything to stop us. One evening, I got a message from Dark SL. You're getting close. Stop now, or you'll regret it. I showed the message to Phoenix. We're on the right track, Phoenix said, but we have to be careful. They're getting desperate. In that moment, I realized how serious this was. My normal life was gone. I was in a dangerous game trying to fix the mess I had made. I had asked for this chaos, but now I was fighting to get my life back. This wasn't over yet. The real fight was just beginning. Phoenix and I kept working together, determined to stop Dark SL. Phoenix was amazing with computers, but they said this was one of the hardest things they'd ever done. Dark SL was really good at hiding. One night, Phoenix messaged me. I found something. It's a small lead, but it might help. They had discovered a connection between Dark SL and a few other hackers. It wasn't much, but it was a start. We spent weeks working nonstop. Phoenix dug deeper into the dark web. finding bits and pieces of information. Slowly, we started to see a bigger picture. We identified some of Dark SL's associates and made a list of possible leads. Then we got a big break. Phoenix found an email that pointed to a location, an old, abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. It seemed like something out of a movie, but we had to check it out. We didn't tell anyone else. We couldn't risk it. The night we went to the warehouse, I was scared out of my mind. Phoenix was confident but careful. We both knew this could be dangerous. We got to the warehouse and sneaked inside. It was dark and dusty, and the air felt heavy. We found a small room at the back, filled with computers. It looked like a hacker's den. Phoenix quickly started checking the computers for any evidence of Dark SL. Then we heard footsteps. Someone was coming. We hid, hearts pounding. 2 men walked in, talking quietly. They started working on the computers, not knowing we were there. Phoenix signaled me to stay hidden and began filming the men with their phone. After what felt like forever, the men left. Phoenix immediately went back to the computers, downloading as much information as possible. It was risky, but we needed proof. After what seemed like ages, Phoenix had what they needed. We left the warehouse, hearts racing. We finally had something solid. Phoenix spent the next few days going through the data, finding links between Dark SL and other hackers, and collecting evidence of their crimes. We took everything to the police. This time they listened. With the evidence Phoenix had gathered, they started to take action. For the first time in months, I felt a bit of hope. The police raided the warehouse and arrested several members of the hacker group. Dark SL was one of them. When I heard the news, I felt a mix of relief and fear. This part of the nightmare was over, but I knew there might be more problems later. Phoenix stayed in touch, helping me secure my digital life. We worked together to change my passwords and remove any remaining traces of Dark SL's influence. It took time, but slowly things started to get better. I reached out to my friends and family, explaining what had happened. Most of them understood, and slowly I began to repair those relationships. It wasn't easy, and some people were still unsure, but I was grateful for the support I did have. Looking back, I realized how reckless I had been. I had invited chaos into my life for excitement, and it almost destroyed me. But I also learned about resilience and the importance of true friends. Phoenix had been a lifesaver, and I was forever grateful. The ordeal had changed me. I was more careful, more aware of the dangers on the internet. I no longer craved excitement. I found peace in the stability of everyday life. This chapter of my life had ended, but the lessons would stay with me forever. I had faced my worst fears and come out the other side, stronger and wiser. After the police arrested Dark SL and their group, things slowly started to improve, but it was a long process. I had a lot of work to do to fix my life. First, I had to get my online accounts back. Phoenix helped me change all my passwords and set up better security. It took a lot of time and effort, but eventually, I got control of my accounts again. I deleted the fake posts and comments Dark SL had made and tried to explain what happened to my friends and family. Some people understood right away, but others took longer to come around. It was tough because the things Dark SL did made me look really bad. I had to be patient and show them I was serious about fixing everything. Finding a new job was hard. After losing my old job, I applied to a lot of places and went to many interviews. My reputation had taken a hit, and it made things difficult. Eventually, I got a job at a small tech company. It wasn't my dream job, but it was a start. My new boss was understanding, and my coworkers were friendly. Having a stable job again felt good. My personal life was a mess too. The stress and anxiety from everything had affected my relationships. I spent a lot of time talking to my friends and family, trying to explain what had happened and why. Some of them were supportive, but others needed more time. It hurt, but I understood why they were cautious. I decided to see a therapist. The constant fear and stress had left me feeling really low. Talking to someone helped me process everything and start to heal. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was a step in the right direction. Phoenix stayed in touch and offered support and advice. They had become a good friend through all of this. We talked regularly, not just about the hacking, but about everyday stuff. It was nice to have someone who understood what I had been through. Slowly, things started to get better. I began to feel more like myself again. I took up old hobbies like reading and hiking and started to enjoy life more. I was more cautious now, but I was also stronger. I had learned a lot about myself and what I could handle. One day, I got a message from Sarah. She had been one of the friends who had stuck by me through everything. She wanted to meet up and catch up. We met at a coffee shop, and it felt good to talk about normal things again. We laughed and reminisced, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly happy. Rebuilding my life was a slow process, but I was getting there. I learned to appreciate the small victories and to be patient with myself. The experience had changed me, but it had also made me stronger and more resilient. Looking back, I knew I had made a huge mistake hiring Dark SL, but I also knew that I had grown from the experience. I had faced some of my darkest fears and come out the other side. I was ready to move forward and build a better, more secure future for myself. As things started to calm down, I had time to think about everything that happened. I went through a lot, and I learned some important things. I want to share my story as a warning to others. First of all, don't go on the dark web. It's not a place to explore for fun or out of curiosity. It's dangerous and you can quickly get in over your head. I went there because I was bored and curious, and it almost ruined my life. The dark web is full of people who do bad things and enjoy causing trouble. You might think you're in control, but you're not. Hiring Dark SL was the biggest mistake of my life. I thought I could handle whatever happened, but I was wrong. The things they did to me were beyond anything I could have imagined. My social life, my job, my mental health, all of it was turned upside down. I lost friends, scared my family, and almost lost my sanity. It's not worth it. If you're feeling bored or restless, find a safer way to shake things up. Try a new hobby, learn something new, or go on an adventure. There are many ways to add excitement to your life without putting yourself in danger. Trust me, the thrill you might find on the dark web is not worth the risk. Also, if you're ever in a situation like mine, don't try to handle it alone. Seek help from professionals, whether it's the police, a cybersecurity expert, or a therapist. I was lucky to find Phoenix, but not everyone is that fortunate. Trying to fix things on your own can make the situation worse. It's also important to protect your online presence. Use strong passwords, enable two-factor authentication, and be careful about what you share online. The internet can be a great place, but it's also full of risks. Take your digital security seriously. In the end, I was able to rebuild my life. I got my accounts back, found a new job, and repaired my relationships. But it took a lot of time and effort. I was lucky to have the support of friends like Phoenix and Sarah, as well as my family. Not everyone is that fortunate. So if you're ever tempted to explore the dark web, think twice. It's not worth the danger and the potential consequences. There are better ways to find excitement and satisfaction in life. Learn from my mistakes and stay safe. Thanks for reading my story. I hope it helps someone avoid the same pitfalls I fell into. Stay safe out there. Hey Reddit, I've been reading creepy stories on here for years, but I never thought I'd have one to share myself. This one is really weird, so I hope you stick with me. A few months ago, I was messing around on the dark web. Yeah, I know it's a bad idea, but I was bored and curious. Anyway, I found this site selling strange stuff. One item caught my eye, a pair of glasses that said they could reveal the unseen. The description didn't say much, but the reviews were super detailed and really positive. I don't know what got into me, but I decided to buy them. They cost way too much, but I figured why not? About 2 weeks later, a plain brown package showed up at my door. Inside was a small box with the glasses and a piece of old paper with some coordinates on it. No note, no instructions, just the glasses and coordinates. It was both exciting and creepy. For a few days, I didn't do anything with them. I left the box on my kitchen table and tried to ignore it, but I couldn't stop thinking about those coordinates. Eventually, my curiosity won. I looked them up, and they pointed to an old, abandoned house not too far from where I live. The place had a spooky reputation, but nobody really knew much about it, so one Saturday, I decided to check it out. I packed a small bag, grabbed a flashlight, and drove out there. The drive was pretty normal, but the closer I got, the more nervous I felt. The road got narrower and windier, leading me into a thick, dark forest. Finally, I saw the house. It looked like something straight out of a horror movie. 2 stories, falling apart, with boarded-up windows and weeds everywhere. I parked my car and just stood there for a minute, taking it all in. Everything was so quiet. No birds, no bugs, nothing. I shook off the creepy feeling and walked up to the door. It creaked open easily, like it had been waiting for me. Inside, the house was a mess. Dust was everywhere, and the air smelled old and musty. I wandered through the rooms, but there was nothing special. Just old furniture covered in sheets and lots of dirt. I was about to leave, feeling disappointed, when I remembered the glasses. I took them out of my bag and hesitated. This felt like a bad idea, but I'd come this far. I put them on and everything changed. At first, it seemed like everything just looked sharper, like I had new vision. But then I started seeing things. Ghostly shapes began to appear. They were faint and flickering, like they were out of an old film. I saw shadows of people moving around the house, doing everyday things. A woman in a dress walked down the hall. A kid played with a toy in the corner, and a man stood by the window staring out. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, but they were still there. The air got really cold, and I started hearing whispers. They were quiet at first, but then they got louder, like lots of people talking at once. My heart was pounding. This wasn't a trick. This was real. I tried to stay calm and took a step forward. The figures didn't seem to notice me. I walked through the house, watching these strange scenes. In the dining room, a family sat at the table, their faces blurry but their movements clear. It felt like I was watching something from another time. In the kitchen, there was a woman standing at the counter. She turned around slowly, and it felt like she was looking right at me. Her face was pale, and her eyes were dark and empty. She opened her mouth like she was going to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, the whispers got louder, almost like they were shouting. I freaked out and ripped the glasses off. Everything went back to normal. The figures were gone, and the house was quiet again. I was shaking and breathing hard. What the hell had I just seen? I ran out of the house, leaving my bag behind. I jumped in my car and drove away as fast as I could. As I got home, I started to realize what had happened. Those glasses weren't just some joke. They showed something real, something terrifying. I locked all my doors and sat down with the glasses in my hand. My mind was racing. Should I call the police? Would they even believe me? Should I throw the glasses away? Part of me was still curious, still wanting to know more. So here I am, posting my story. I'm hoping someone here might know what's going on or have a similar experience. For now, I'm hiding the glasses, but I have a feeling this is just the start. I know I can't ignore this. Something weird is going on, something more than just a few ghosts. I'm going to research the house and its history. Maybe I can find out what's happening. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking around. After my last visit to the abandoned house, I knew I had to find out more. I couldn't just leave it alone. So I decided to do some research about the house and its history. First, I went to the local library. I spent hours looking through old newspapers and records. The house was built in the early 1900s by a man named William Hargrove. He lived there with his wife, Margaret, and their young son, Peter. Everything seemed normal until one day in the 1920s when the whole family just disappeared. No one knew what happened to them. The house was sold a few times after that, but every new owner reported weird things. Stuff moving on its own, cold spots, and whispers. Eventually it was abandoned. With this new info, I decided to visit the local historical society. They had more detailed records and some old photos of the Hargrove family. Seeing their faces gave me chills. I recognized them from the ghostly figures I'd seen in the house. One of the volunteers at the Historical Society, an older woman named Mrs. Thompson, noticed I was interested and asked if I needed help. I told her a bit about what I was looking into, leaving out the part about the glasses and ghosts. She mentioned that there were rumors about the house being cursed and that people believed the Hargrove family's spirits were trapped there. I asked her if there was any way to find out more about what might have happened to the Hargrove family. She suggested looking into old police records or talking to some of the older residents in town who might remember stories from their parents or grandparents. I spent the next few days talking to anyone who would listen. Most people just repeated the same old ghost stories, but a few had interesting bits. One man, Mr. Allen, told me his grandfather used to work for the Hargroves. He said there were rumors about Mr. Hargrove doing some kind of dark rituals and that he had a secret room in the house where he did them. This was getting weirder by the minute. I decided to go back to the house one more time and look for that secret room. Maybe that's where I'd find the truth the ghost woman was talking about. So, I geared up again and headed back. It was late afternoon when I got there. I didn't waste any time. I put the glasses on right away and started looking for anything unusual. The ghostly figures were there again, doing their usual routines, but I ignored them and focused on finding the secret room. I searched the ground floor first but didn't find anything. Then I moved to the second floor. In one of the bedrooms, I noticed something odd, a faint outline on the wall like a hidden door. I pushed on it and to my surprise it opened, revealing a narrow staircase leading down. My heart was pounding as I went down the stairs. At the bottom was a small, dimly lit room. The air was thick and musty. In the middle of the room was an old wooden table covered with strange symbols and candles. There were also some old books and papers scattered around. I picked up one of the books and flipped through it. It was full of notes about summoning spirits and other dark rituals. This must have been what Mr. Allen was talking about. I took out my phone and snapped some pictures, hoping they might help me understand what was going on. Suddenly I felt a cold breeze and heard a whisper, "Thank you." I turned around and saw the woman from before, looking more solid than ever. She smiled sadly and said, "You found it. Now you can help us." I wanted to ask her what I needed to do, but she vanished before I could say anything. I quickly left the secret room and the house, my mind racing with questions. What did she mean? How could I help them? I drove home, my head spinning. I knew I needed to figure out how to use the information I found in the secret room. Maybe the books and papers held the key to freeing the spirits trapped in the house. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking with me through this. So after I found that secret room and saw the ghost woman again, I knew I had to figure out what she meant by help us. I couldn't get it out of my head, so I spent a few days going over the pictures I took of the books and papers in the secret room. Most of it was about summoning spirits and weird rituals, but one book had something different. It had steps for a ritual to release trapped spirits. I figured this had to be it. The ritual was complicated and needed a bunch of specific items: candles, salt, a silver bell, and some herbs I'd never heard of. I made a list and started looking for everything. It took a while to get all the stuff. I had to go to several stores and even order some things online. Once I had everything, I read through the ritual instructions a bunch of times to make sure I knew what to do. I didn't want to screw this up. The ritual had to be done at midnight in the same place where the spirits were trapped. So, I went back to the old house, feeling both nervous and excited. I set everything up in the secret room, candles in each corner, a circle of salt in the middle, and the silver bell and herbs on the table. I put on the glasses to see if the spirits were there. They were. The Hargrove family appeared around me, looking more real than before. Margaret, the woman, nodded at me, like she was saying, "Go on." I took a deep breath and started the ritual. I lit the candles and walked around the salt circle, sprinkling the herbs and ringing the bell. The air felt heavy, like something was happening. I read the words from the book, hoping I was doing it right. As I chanted, the ghostly figures started to glow softly. Margaret stepped into the circle, followed by William and Peter. They watched me with hopeful eyes. I kept going, even though the air got colder and the candlelight flickered. Suddenly, the dark shape I saw before appeared at the edge of the room. It felt menacing, like it wanted to stop me, but I kept focused on the ritual. The dark figure moved closer, but the Hargroves held their ground, glowing brighter with each word I said. Finally, I reached the last part of the ritual. I rang the bell one last time and sprinkled the last of the herbs into the circle. The room filled with a bright light, and I heard a soft, collective sigh. The Hargroves looked at me with gratitude, then slowly faded away. The dark figure vanished too, like it had been defeated. The room was quiet again, but it felt different, lighter, almost peaceful. I took off the glasses and sat down, feeling exhausted but relieved. I think I did it. I think I helped them. I left the house feeling a mix of emotions. I was glad the spirits were free, but I also felt a bit sad, like I was saying goodbye to friends. Back home, I put the glasses away, not sure if I'd ever need them again. I don't know if I'll go back to that house, but I feel like I did something important. Thanks for following my story. I'll let you know if anything else happens. And I said that too fast. Something happened. After the ritual, I thought everything was done, but something kept bugging me. I couldn't stop thinking about those glasses. They felt wrong, like they were cursed or something. I started worrying that as long as I had them, I wasn't really free from all the creepy stuff. So I did some more research on cursed objects. There's a lot of info out there about how objects can hold bad energy or be cursed. It hit me that these glasses might be one of those things. They showed me the spirits and also that dark, creepy figure. I realized I had to get rid of the glasses for good, not just hide them. I found some advice online about how to break curses by destroying the objects tied to them. It sounded like a good plan, so I decided to follow it to make sure the glasses couldn't hurt anyone else. First, I took the glasses and wrapped them in a cloth. Then I made a small fire in my backyard. I put the glasses in the fire, hoping that burning them would break whatever curse they had. As they started to burn, I felt a weird sense of relief, like I was finally doing the right thing. But burning them wasn't enough. The info I found said that sometimes cursed objects need to be completely destroyed. So after the fire burned out and the glasses were just a charred mess, I took a hammer and smashed the remains into tiny pieces. I made sure there was nothing left that could be used again. After that, I buried the pieces deep in the ground, far away from my house. I didn't want to take any chances. I feel like it's really over now. The house feels lighter, and I haven't seen or heard anything weird since then. I hope the Hargroves are at peace now, and that dark figure is gone for good. One last thing, stay away from the dark web. Seriously, I thought I was just buying a weird pair of glasses for fun, but it turned into something way more intense and dangerous than I could have imagined. There's a lot of creepy and harmful stuff out there, and you don't want to get mixed up in it. Thanks for following my story, everyone. I hope this is the end of my creepy adventure. Stay safe out there, and trust me, some things are better left alone to be buried deep in the ground or forgotten. Don't do what we did on the dark web, please. So how do I even start this? I guess I should start this by saying, hello Reddit. I never thought I would share a dark web experience here, but here I am. Anyway, my name is Michael, and I have a best friend as well. His name is Noah. We have been stuck together since kindergarten. And to be perfectly honest with you all, we always have been crazy duo. We would do a lot of stupid or crazy things together, sometimes even dangerous. When I say crazy, I mean like we would do stupid pranks on our teachers and classmates back in high school. Like one time we put super glue on our teacher chair, and when he stood up again, his pants were ripped. Every one of our classmates laughed, but we got expelled for a few weeks. No big deal though. So, one day we were planning a trip to the cabin in the woods where we would often go. With the two of us, it was never boring, but I wanted something more. I wanted us to do something that would make this more interesting. And then my friend said, "Dark web, dude." I said, "What? What is even that?" Noah said something like, "The regular internet. But you can find anything you're looking for there. Even illegal stuff." I told him we're not buying anything illegal. He said, "Yay, that's okay. It was just for explanation." I said that. Both of us were noobs with computers, so we watched a tutorial on how to access the dark web. After watching a few tutorials, we downloaded the Tor browser and a VPN. We also had an old laptop we didn't need anymore, so we used that. On the tutorials, they were calling it a burner computer. A burner computer is a computer you use once, for example, to get on the dark web, and then you throw it away. We also covered the camera on the laptop with black tape, and we finally fired up Tor. When we were on the dark web, we saw nothing special. There were all these weird links, we didn't know what they were. We barely knew how to use a computer, and the dark web was beyond our understanding level. So, we just started randomly clicking on links. For about half an hour, it was just stupid text-written stuff. Nothing special. And it was boring. Until Noah clicked on a link that was selling something. A fruit. It was a weird fruit we've never seen before. It said it was a fruit that the old tribes used for some weird spiritual ritual. Noah wasn't exactly interested, but me, on the other hand. I had this weird smile on my face, and when he saw me, he said, "Dude, please no, I know that look. Please don't order this, it's probably a scam. And look at the price of this thing. It's $250. And it can be poisonous," he said. I said, "I don't care. We are ordering this." It said it will be delivered anywhere in the world, so we wrote a location that was close to our cabin. The payment they wanted to be in Bitcoin. We had no clue what that is. So more searching on YouTube for tutorials and how to get that stuff and what that is. I will not get into too many details about how we bought Bitcoin, because it's not important. What's important is that we bought that weird spiritual food or whatever that is. So, for the day we went home, I forgot to mention that the laptop we used it to access the dark web, we threw it away in a garbage can. So I was finally at home, lying on my bed. I went to sleep because tomorrow morning we needed to go to the cabin. I closed my eyes, and then the next thing I heard was my phone ringing. It was Noah. He said, "You awake, dude?" I asked why. He said, "Come on, dude. It is time. We need to go to the cabin." I said to Noah, "Okay, I will come to pick you up." He said that he's ready and he's waiting for me. I got up and I got dressed. I quickly left my house. In about half hour, I was at Noah's place. I picked him up and we started driving towards the mountains where the cabin was. While driving there, nothing special happened. So when we got there, we parked in front of our cabin and quickly went to check if the fruit had arrived. But it wasn't there yet. So we went back to the cabin again to have a barbecue and have some fun for now. That's how the first day went. Just eating, music, and talking. Nothing special. It was getting late, so we went to bed. The other day I woke up and Noah was still sleeping. So I decided to pass the time by going to check if the fruit had arrived. To my surprise, there was a box. I got excited, grabbed the box, and went back to wake Noah up. I got into our cabin and started yelling, "Dude, it has arrived finally. The fruit is here. My fruit is here." Noah said, "Okay, the fruit is here now, and I know you paid about $300 for that shit. But seriously, you are not considering eating that, right? I said, of course I will eat it. I paid for it. So I will. He said it could be poisonous. I said, well, that's why you are here. I said, if something happens, I am in your hands. Before I get to the part where I ate that stuff, I want to describe how it looked. The fruit had a weird shape, and weird color as well. It was something like purple and red combined, and then in one moment I just ate it. The only thing I remember, I just blinked. The next time I opened my eyes, I was on a boat. I was so freaked out. I was with a guy next to me. I had no clue who he was. I asked him, who are you? He said, what? Are you okay? I am your best friend, Sam. I said, who? He said, did you hit your head or something? I said, no, but I really have no clue who you are. Then a girl started yelling, Daddy, Daddy. I didn't pay too much attention since I was not a parent. Then the guy who called himself Sam said, dude, your daughter is calling out to you. I said, who? Your daughter, man. I looked back and there she was, a kid. I asked, and who was the woman standing next to her? Sam said, your wife, dude. Okay, just sit down. Wait. You really are not okay, Michael, he said. So, I sat down. Then I remember blinking again. And I was in a house this time. The woman from the boat came to my room and said, dinner is ready, honey. I said, do I still have no clue who the hell you are? I don't know you, I don't know who the kid is, and I don't know anyone named Sam. What the hell is going on? And in that moment I started to regain consciousness again. I felt my friend shaking me up. He said, dude, are you okay? I was all sweaty. I asked him how long was I gone for. He said about 5 seconds. Why? I told him I lived about 10 years of my life in those 5 seconds. He said, what? I told him I had a kid and wife, and a new best friend named Sam. I also told him I am never trying something like this again. But I said to him, if you want to try it as well, there is still a little bit of fruit left. He said, no, we just laughed it off. And that is like my really creepy story that happened. Will I do it again? Hell no. Do I regret it? Also, hell no. It was a good experience, even though it was freaky as hell. I actually found the name of the fruit later on, and I will not reveal it to you. It is a fruit you can legally buy, I will say just that much. Thanks for listening to my story, Redditors, and leave a comment. I really want to hear your thoughts on this. Will you try it if you have a chance? Or will you pass on it? Let me know. Until next time, see you and have a good life. I really hope there is no next story from me. Hey Reddit. Long-time lurker, first-time poster here. I never thought I'd have anything worth sharing until last week. I'm still trying to process what happened, and honestly, writing this is my way of coping. I apologize if this comes off as rambling, but I need to get it all out. A bit about me. I'm a 25-year-old guy living alone in a small town in the Midwest. I've always been into the paranormal ever since I was a kid. Ghost stories, haunted places, you name it. I spend a lot of my free time browsing dark web forums looking for spooky content that you can't find on the surface web. Most of it is just garbage, but occasionally you come across something really intriguing. Last month, I stumbled upon a blog that piqued my interest. It was called Paranormal Explorer, and it was filled with stories of people exploring haunted places. What caught my eye was a post about an abandoned warehouse from World War I. The blogger claimed it was located somewhere in the Midwest, but they didn't give exact coordinates. Instead, they left a series of clues, supposedly to keep it from getting too crowded with thrill seekers. After spending countless hours deciphering the clues, I finally pinpointed the location. It was only a few hours' drive from my place. I couldn't believe my luck. The blog mentioned that the warehouse was haunted by the ghosts of soldiers who had died there under mysterious circumstances. There were stories of screams, metal banging, and doors closing on their own. It sounded like the perfect place for an adventure. I packed my gear: flashlight, extra batteries, my old camcorder, and some snacks. The snacks are the most important, remember that. And I set off early Saturday morning. The drive was uneventful, but as I got closer, the roads became narrower and less maintained. It was clear that not many people came this way anymore. The coordinates led me to a dirt road that wound through dense woods. After what felt like forever, I finally saw it. A massive, crumbling warehouse partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. It looked like something straight out of a horror movie. The windows were shattered, and the metal doors were rusted and hanging off their hinges. I parked my car a safe distance away and walked the rest of the way, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. I couldn't believe I was actually doing this. I filmed the approach on my camcorder, narrating as I went. The air felt heavy, and there was an eerie silence broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. As I got closer, I noticed strange symbols painted on the walls. They looked old and faded, but I could make out some of them. They were definitely not graffiti. I had no idea what they meant, but they added to the unsettling atmosphere. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The interior was dark and musty, with the faint smell of decay. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing rows of rusted machinery and piles of debris. I could hear my footsteps echoing, making the place feel even more deserted. I wandered through the first floor, filming everything. There were old crates, broken tools, and what looked like an ancient generator. I tried to imagine what this place must have been like during the war. It must have been bustling with activity, soldiers working and shouting orders. Now it was just a ghostly shell. I found a staircase leading to the second floor and decided to check it out. The steps creaked under my weight, and I had to be careful not to fall through. The second floor was more of the same, abandoned machinery, crates, and debris, but then I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the far corner of the room, there was a makeshift altar. It was covered in melted candles, and there were more of those strange symbols painted around it. In the center, there was a photograph of a soldier, yellowed with age. It was creepy as hell, but I couldn't look away. I heard a noise behind me and spun around, my heart racing. There was nothing there. I told myself it was just the wind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I decided to leave the second floor and explore the rest of the warehouse. That's when I heard it, a faint scream coming from somewhere below. It was so quiet that I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time. My heart was pounding in my chest as I followed the sound. It led me to a door at the back of the warehouse. The paint was peeling, and it looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. I hesitated for a moment, my hand on the doorknob. Every instinct told me to turn around and leave, but curiosity got the better of me. I pushed the door open and was hit by a blast of cold, damp air. The stairs leading down were steep and narrow, and I had to be careful not to slip. The screams were getting louder, echoing off the walls. My flashlight flickered, and I cursed under my breath, shaking it to keep it on. The basement was even darker and mustier than the rest of the warehouse. I could barely see a few feet in front of me, but I kept moving forward. The screams had stopped, replaced by a low metallic banging. It sounded like someone was hitting a pipe with a hammer. I turned a corner and saw a row of old rusted doors. They looked like they led to storage rooms or offices. As I approached, one of the doors slammed shut with a deafening bang. I jumped back, my heart pounding. There was no way that door could have moved on its own. It was like someone or something was trying to scare me away. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I wanted to leave, but I was too deep in now. I had to see this through. I reached for the door handle, my hand shaking. Before I could touch it, the door swung open on its own. I stared into the darkness beyond the door, my flashlight barely piercing the gloom. That's when I saw them. Figures, standing in the shadows. They were barely visible, but I could make out their outlines. They looked like soldiers, dressed in old, tattered uniforms. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The figures didn't move either. They just stood there, watching me. Then, one of them took a step forward and I felt a chill run down my spine. The soldier's face was twisted in a grotesque expression of pain and anger. His eyes were hollow, and his skin was pale and mottled. He opened his mouth and let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the basement. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and ran, my flashlight bobbing wildly. The metal banging was louder now, like the whole place was coming apart. I sprinted up the stairs, my heart in my throat. The screams followed me, growing fainter as I reached the first floor. I didn't stop running until I was outside, gasping for breath. I glanced back at the warehouse, half expecting to see the figures chasing me, but there was nothing, just the dark, silent building looming in the shadows. I didn't waste any time getting back to my car. I threw my gear in the back seat and sped away, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I didn't look back until I was miles away, and even then I felt like I could still hear the screams echoing in my ears. I don't know what I saw in that warehouse, but I'm not going back to find out. Maybe the stories were true, or maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. All I know is that something was in there, something that didn't want me to leave, and I don't think it's done with me yet. Hey Reddit, it's me again. Thanks for all the comments and support on my last post. I never expected it to get so much attention. Writing about what happened helped a lot, but I'm still not done. There's more to the story, and I need to share it. I think it might help me understand what's going on. After I escaped the warehouse, I couldn't get it out of my mind. I kept replaying the events in my head, trying to make sense of what I saw and heard. But the worst part wasn't the memories. It was the dreams. The first night after my visit, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of those soldiers, twisted in pain and anger. I felt their hollow eyes watching me, and I could still hear their screams echoing in my ears. When I finally did drift off, the dream started. In the dream, I was back in the warehouse. The air was cold and damp just like before. I could hear the distant sound of metal banging and the faint whispers of voices. I tried to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like I was rooted to the spot. Then, I heard it. A voice, clear and distinct, cutting through the whispers. It was a man's voice, pleading for help. "Please," he said. "You have to help us. We're trapped." I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just a dream. But it didn't feel like a dream. It felt too real. The next night, it happened again. This time, the voice was louder, more insistent. "Please come back," it said. "We need your help." I woke up gasping for air, the voice still ringing in my ears. Every night, the dreams grew more vivid. I saw the warehouse in greater detail, like I was actually there. The voice became clearer, and I started to recognize it. It was the same soldier whose photograph I had seen on the altar. His face was burned into my memory, his eyes filled with desperation. During the day, I tried to go about my normal routine, but the dreams haunted me. I couldn't concentrate at work, and I started avoiding people. I didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to admit that I was scared out of my mind. But the voice wouldn't leave me alone. One night, the dream took a different turn. I was in the basement again, standing in front of the row of doors. The banging was louder than ever, and the voice was shouting now. "Help us! We're trapped! You have to set us free!" I felt a hand on my shoulder and spun around. There was no one there, but the voice continued, now sounding right next to my ear. "You need to come back. We can't leave. Please, you're our only hope." I woke up shaking, my heart pounding. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. The voice was begging for help, and it felt like it was reaching out to me, like it knew I was the only one who could do something. The next day, I did some research. I found old records about the warehouse, confirming that it had been used during World War I. There were rumors about a fire that had broken out, trapping several soldiers inside. Their bodies were never recovered, and the place had been abandoned ever since. I didn't want to believe it, but everything was starting to make sense. The symbols, the altar, the voices, it all pointed to the same thing. The soldiers were trapped there, their spirits unable to move on. And for some reason, they thought I could help them. I wrestled with the decision for days. Part of me wanted to forget the whole thing, to pretend it never happened. But the dreams wouldn't stop. The voice grew more desperate, more pleading. I couldn't escape it. Finally, I made up my mind. I would go back to the warehouse, but this time, I'd be better prepared. I stocked up on supplies, extra flashlights, batteries, a first aid kit, and some basic ghost hunting equipment I found online. I also bought a small digital recorder, hoping to capture any evidence of the paranormal activity. I waited for the weekend when I'd have more time to explore without interruption. The night before, the dream was more intense than ever. The voice was crying, begging me to come back. I woke up with tears in my eyes, feeling the weight of their desperation. I packed my car early Saturday morning and set off for the warehouse. The drive felt longer this time, and my anxiety grew with every mile. When I finally arrived, the warehouse looked even more menacing than before. The setting sun cast long shadows, and the air felt charged with a strange energy. I parked in the same spot and took a deep breath. This was it. I had to see this through, for the sake of those trapped souls, and for my own peace of mind. I grabbed my gear and headed towards the warehouse, the familiar sense of dread settling over me. As I approached the entrance, I heard a faint whisper. It was the voice, urging me forward. "Please come inside. We need you." I steeled myself and stepped through the door, determined to uncover the truth and hopefully set them free. Hey Reddit, thanks for sticking with me through this. Writing these posts has been therapeutic, but what happened next is something I still struggle to understand. I hope sharing it here helps me make sense of it. After entering the warehouse for the second time, I felt a strange mix of fear and determination. The air inside was just as cold and musty as before, and the eerie silence made my skin crawl. I had packed an Ouija board, something I'd never used before but had read about extensively. I figured if I was going to communicate with the spirits, I needed something to help me. I set up the Ouija board on a flat piece of debris in the center of the warehouse. I lit a few candles around it to create a circle of light in the darkness. As the flames flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, I felt a chill run down my spine. I took a deep breath and placed my fingers on the planchette, ready to start. "Is anyone here with me?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the planchette began to move. I could feel a faint pressure, like someone was gently guiding it. Y-E-S. My heart pounded in my chest. I wasn't sure if it was really happening or if my mind was playing tricks on me, but I decided to continue. "What is your name?" I asked. The planchette moved again, spelling out the name, Samuel. "Samuel," I repeated. "Were you one of the soldiers trapped here?" Y-E-S. "Can you tell me what happened? Why are you trapped here?" There was a long pause, and then the planchette began to move more quickly, spelling out a chilling message, RITUAL. "What kind of ritual?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The planchette continued, spelling out the story in short, fragmented sentences. TRIEDTOCOMMUNICATE WITHSPIRITS SOMETHINGWENTWRONG. I shivered, imagining the scene. A group of soldiers, desperate and scared, trying to reach out to the other side. But something had gone terribly wrong, and now they were trapped, unable to move on. "Why did you do the ritual?" I asked, feeling a mix of curiosity and dread. The planchette moved again. LOSTCOMRADESWANTEDTOSAYGOODBYE. I felt a pang of sympathy for these men. They had lost their friends in the chaos of war and had turned to the supernatural in a desperate attempt to find closure. But instead they had trapped themselves in this haunted place. "Is there any way to help you?" I asked, hoping there was something I could do. The planchette paused, then spelled out BREAKTHECIRCLE. "What circle?" I asked, confused. SAMECIRCLEWEDREW. I racked my brain, trying to remember if I had seen anything like that during my first visit. Then it hit me. The symbols painted around the altar. They must have been part of the ritual circle the soldiers had drawn. "I'll do my best to find it and break it," I said, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The planchette moved one last time. THANKYOU. I carefully packed up the Ouija board and stood up, my legs feeling shaky. I knew what I had to do. I needed to find that circle and break it, to free the trapped souls and finally put an end to this nightmare. I retraced my steps to the second floor, where I had seen the altar and the symbols. As I entered the room, the temperature seemed to drop even further. The symbols were faint, but still visible, painted in a strange reddish-brown color. I grabbed a piece of broken metal and started scratching through the paint, disrupting the lines of the circle. As I worked, I heard whispers growing louder around me. It was like the soldiers were watching, urging me on. My heart raced, but I kept going, determined to finish what I had started. Finally, I stepped back, breathing heavily. The circle was broken, the symbols disrupted. The air seemed to lighten, and for a moment I thought I heard a collective sigh of relief. The temperature in the room rose slightly, and the oppressive feeling lifted. I hoped that meant the spirits were finally free. I left the warehouse feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. I didn't know if I had truly helped the trapped souls, but I felt like I had done something good. As I drove away, I glanced back at the warehouse one last time. It looked less menacing in the daylight, almost peaceful. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. The dreams were gone, and the voice was silent. I hoped that meant Samuel and the others had found peace, but... After breaking the circle in the warehouse, I thought my ordeal was over. The dreams had stopped, and I felt like I had helped the trapped souls find peace. For a few days, everything was normal. I went to work, hung out with friends, and even started to feel like my old self again. But then something strange happened. It started with little things, misplacing items, hearing faint whispers when I was alone, and feeling a constant, nagging sense of unease. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling grew stronger with each passing day. One night I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. I had dreamed of the warehouse again, but this time it was different. The soldiers were there, but they weren't thanking me. They were angry, their faces twisted in rage. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stood out. He was glaring at me, his eyes filled with hatred. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his voice echoing in my mind. I woke up with his words ringing in my ears. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Something was wrong. I could feel it. The next day, I did some research, trying to find out more about the warehouse and the soldiers who had died there. I came across an old newspaper article that mentioned a soldier named Thomas, who had been part of the group that performed the ritual. According to the article, Thomas had been deeply interested in the occult and was the one who led the ritual that trapped them. The more I read, the more I realized that not all the spirits wanted to leave. Thomas had been obsessed with the idea of communicating with the dead, and it seemed like he still had unfinished business. I started to wonder if I had made a mistake by breaking the circle. That night the dreams returned, more vivid and terrifying than ever. I saw Thomas standing in the warehouse, his face contorted with anger. "You think you can free them?" he spat. "You can't save them. They belong here, with me." I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. I knew I had to go back to the warehouse to confront whatever was happening. I packed my gear again, feeling a mix of fear and determination. As I drove back, the familiar sense of dread settled over me. When I arrived, the warehouse looked just as ominous as before. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the air heavy with a sense of foreboding. I retraced my steps to the second floor, where the altar and the broken circle were. The room felt colder, and I could hear faint whispers all around me. I set up the Ouija board again, hoping to communicate with the spirits and understand what was happening. As soon as I placed my fingers on the planchette, it began to move, spelling out a single word. Thomas. "Thomas," I said aloud. "Why are you still here?" The planchette moved quickly, almost angrily. Theybelong. "They don't belong to you," I said, my voice shaking. "They deserve to be free." The planchette moved again, spelling out a chilling message. IWILLNOTLEAVE. Suddenly I felt a cold, intense pressure around my head. It was like something was trying to force its way into my mind. I tried to resist, but the pressure grew stronger. I felt myself losing control, my thoughts becoming muddled. It was as if Thomas was trying to take over my body. I struggled to stay conscious, but it was no use. The last thing I remembered was the sound of the planchette scraping across the board and Thomas's voice whispering in my ear, "You can't save them. They are mine." When I woke up, I was no longer in control. I could see and hear everything, but it was like I was a passenger in my own body. Thomas had taken over, and he was using me to restore the circle and trap the souls once again. I watched in horror as my hands moved on their own, redrawing the symbols with precision. Thomas's thoughts mingled with mine, and I could feel his satisfaction as the circle was completed. The oppressive feeling in the air returned, and the whispers grew louder, filled with fear and anger. As I finished the last symbol, I felt a surge of energy. Thomas was trying to anchor himself to this world, using my body as a vessel. I fought with every ounce of strength I had, trying to push him out, but he was too strong. "You can't win," Thomas hissed in my mind. "They are mine, and so are you." In a final act of desperation, I focused all my willpower on one thought: breaking the circle. With a burst of energy, I managed to move my hand, smudging one of the symbols. The circle broke, and I felt a sudden release of pressure. Thomas screamed in rage, and the world around me seemed to blur and twist. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The whispers faded, and the room grew warmer. I could feel Thomas's presence fading, his hold on me weakening. I lay there for what felt like hours, too exhausted to move. When I finally stood up, I felt a strange sense of peace. The oppressive feeling was gone, and the air felt lighter. I hoped that meant the souls were finally free, including Thomas. I left the warehouse for the last time, determined never to return. I don't know if I truly freed the spirits or if Thomas is still out there, waiting for another chance to return. All I know is that I'll never forget what happened, and I'll always be haunted by the memories of that place. Hey Reddit, this is the last part of my story. I've shared everything up to this point, but what happened next still haunts me. Writing it down is my way of finding closure, even if it's a painful process. After breaking free from Thomas's possession, I thought I had saved the souls trapped in the warehouse. But as the days passed, I started to realize that something was terribly wrong. The peace I felt that night was short-lived. The dreams returned, more intense and disturbing than ever before. In these dreams, I was back in the warehouse, but this time I wasn't alone. The soldiers were there, but they weren't angry or vengeful. They were silent, their eyes filled with a deep, unending sorrow. They didn't scream or lash out. Instead, they simply stood there watching me with expressions of despair. The worst part was seeing Thomas. He was always in the background, his face twisted in a triumphant grin. I could hear his voice in my mind taunting me. You couldn't save them. They're mine forever. I woke up night after night, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. I knew I had to go back to the warehouse one last time to see for myself what had happened. I drove back with a heavy heart, dreading what I might find. The warehouse looked the same as ever, its dilapidated walls and shattered windows casting long shadows in the fading light. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the familiar cold and musty air enveloping me. I made my way to the second floor, where the altar and the circle were. As I entered the room, I felt a crushing sense of despair. The symbols I had smudged were intact, perfectly redrawn. The circle was complete again, just as it had been before. I realized then what Thomas had done. While he had possessed me, he had used my body to restore the circle completely. I hadn't broken his hold on the spirits. I had solidified it. The souls of the soldiers were trapped forever, unable to leave the warehouse. They were bound to this place, prisoners of Thomas's twisted ritual. I felt a wave of nausea and guilt wash over me. I had come here to help, but I had only made things worse. I could hear faint whispers around me, the voices of the trapped souls filled with sorrow and resignation. They knew they could never leave. I sank to my knees, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know what to do, how to fix this. The weight of my failure was crushing. I could still hear Thomas's laughter in my mind, a constant reminder of my helplessness. As I sat there, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was a cold, ghostly touch, but it wasn't threatening. It was comforting, almost gentle. I looked up and saw the soldier from the photograph, Samuel. His eyes were filled with sadness, but there was a hint of understanding there too. "Thank you for trying," he whispered. "You did your best." I wanted to say something, to apologize, but no words came out. Samuel nodded, a faint, sad smile on his lips. Then he faded away, leaving me alone in the cold, dark room. I knew then that there was nothing more I could do. The spirits were trapped, and no amount of effort on my part could change that. Thomas's ritual had sealed their fate, and I had unwittingly played a part in it. I left the warehouse for the final time, my heart heavy with regret. The drive back home was a blur, my mind consumed by thoughts of the trapped souls and my role in their eternal imprisonment. I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt and despair. Since then, I've tried to move on with my life, but the memories of that place haunt me. I still hear the whispers sometimes, feel the cold touch of Samuel's hand. I know they're out there, trapped forever in that warehouse, and there's nothing I can do to save them. I hope that sharing this story helps others understand the dangers of meddling with the unknown. Some things are better left alone, and sometimes our best intentions can lead to the worst outcomes. I'll never forget what happened, and I'll always carry the weight of those trapped souls with me. Thank you for listening, Reddit. This is the end of my story, but it's not the end of my journey. I'll always be searching for a way to find peace, both for myself and for the spirits I couldn't save.